Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching or listening to this podcast. Welcome to Your Onion Podcast. Today we have a very special guest who is Professor Dr. Alraouf. Did I pronounce it properly? Okay, I always struggle with surnames. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'll just call you Ali from now on.
Sure.
Okay, that's easier when we're doing the conversation. So Ali, thank you for coming on the show. Can you give us a brief insight into who you are and where you've come from and why you are here in Qatar now?
Well, as you said brilliantly, you pronounced my name, so I'm so happy for that. My name is Ali Alraouf. I'm originally from Cairo, Egypt, and I did my undergraduate and postgraduate studies in architecture and urbanism. I've been traveling the world. I had excellent time in University of California at Berkeley, which literally shaped my thoughts and intellectual and critical capabilities. And then I decided to move to the Gulf because of the unprecedented evolution in terms of architecture and city planning. So I spent 5 years in Bahrain, and I joined Qatar University almost 10 years ago. And then I'm honored now to head a unit for research and development at the Urban Planning Department here in Qatar.
Superb. Now, what was it that kind of inspired you to go into architecture from a young age? Because I've got a son who's very into, loves maths, but also loves drawing. So we went, you should be an architect. What was it when you were younger that kind of inspired you to go into that field?
Well, to be very honest with you, after 32 years in educating students about architecture and urbanism, I would say that sometimes we sort of jump into the conclusion of if we have a talented person in drawings, in math, that would be a good candidate for studying architecture.
Yeah, and it's not?
Well, with my due respect, I think, and this is what I was trying to introduce to the aptitude test in different schools of architecture that I was honored to be part of the faculty, is that we need also to understand how those kids are sort of perceiving the whole notion of people and places, how they feel about contributing to creating positive places for people. Because if we only focus on the notion of drawings, you might end up with what I would call it architecture for the elite rather than architecture for the community. So definitely the ability to draw is wonderful, but also the ability to sort of articulate some thoughts regarding how you would envision your role shaping places and spaces.
Now, has that changed over the years? Because you've probably seen it from, when you first started in architecture to where it is now. Are you considering people more in the workplace and in the living space compared to way back where it was more like, if it looks nice, then,
I would definitely agree with you, and I would even suggest that we had a fundamental paradigm shift in the sense that architecture as a topic of study in universities and also as a sort of a practice was sort of articulated and designed to speak to the elite, to speak to the few. And I think the paradigm shift started mainly by the consequences of the Second World War, when a lot of people realized excellent theologians like Jane Jacobs in England, for instance, where they started saying that it's not only about designing a house by the beach, but it's about designing a waterfront for the whole community. And I think this is the paradigm shift that I am personally very excited about.
Superb. Coming from Egypt and then moving over to California to do your study, how was that? That's two different kinds of culture and the way of thinking.
It was dramatic.
Yeah, I can
It was
imagine.
dramatic from the very first day. And it was not a typical cultural shock because Berkeley also as a city, it's very, very liberal.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of city that from the very first moment, you will feel that you have to have an opinion, you have to have a position, and you are entitled to your opinion and your position, and this is the birthplace of the free speech movement.
Yeah.
So coming from Egypt with all this kind of conservatism and respect, and you have to obey and you have to stick to the rules, it took me a bit to acknowledge this, but then later I enjoyed it, and I think it profoundly affected my personality.
Yeah. Well, I can see that when you first gave that introduction, that was something that really moved you and changed you.
Definitely, definitely.
So, okay, so you studied in California, and then you came back to the Middle East after that?
I spent some time in Cairo, and then I moved to Bahrain.
So, and what were you doing in those instances when you came back to Cairo?
I was mainly teaching, and also I did some practice.
And was that what you wanted to do? Teach more than actually, work and design and...
To be very honest with you, design is like also a sort of one of the platforms for manifesting your ideas. So when I was in Egypt, I was able to do both because I love teaching. Teaching is a passion, and I am the kind of person that would generate energy out of my students.
Yeah.
So my students were telling me all the time that you are inspiring us, but actually it's vice versa. I get a lot of ideas and energy from interacting with my students. But also in Egypt, because of the economical situation, you have the right to have your own studio and you do your own designs. So I was also enjoying this. But then later when I moved to Bahrain, the focus was on writing, research, teaching, and you provide consultancy, but only via the university or the government.
No, I totally agree with you. When you, like we have interns coming into our company, so I'm always looking to them for inspiration, as well as, for us to show them, teaching them, the tricks of the trade, etc. So it's,
Sure.
I've always said when an intern comes in, look, we're here to learn from you as well as you learn from us.
Yeah, can't agree more.
No, absolutely. So in Cairo, have you seen, architecture change, and, how do they deal with designing buildings within a framework of, history that they have already? Is it complicated? Is it easy?
I think the fundamental challenge for Egypt in general, and particularly Cairo, is that you're talking about one of the greatest city on earth. And when I'm saying that not as a bias to my country and to my capital city, but when you see the layers, the historical layers accumulated in only a single street in Cairo, you'll be literally amazed.
Yeah.
But while heritage and history can provide beautiful examples for us, I think the fundamental challenge for a lot of architects in Egypt was that they sort of limited their inspiration to a representation of a specific chapter in history. So they would resort to Islamic architecture, Pharaonic architecture, Coptic architecture. And in this sense, as if you freeze your identity, as if identity is a product, is not a process. And I think that was one of the main challenges, how to see the cultural continuity and therefore the architectural creativity as a continuous process, rather than only select a specific time frame and either copy it and paste it, or inspire from it and reproduce it in a different format.
Right. And so when you left Egypt, you went to Bahrain, and you were there for...
I was there for 5 years.
Okay, and what was your responsibility?
I was teaching at University of Bahrain School of Architecture.
Okay, and so after that, what made you come over to Qatar?
Well, it's quite amazing because I was attending a conference, and then some colleagues said there are a lot of issues happening in Qatar that might interest you? And I said, well, no, because I am a regular traveler to Qatar, because I used to come here to watch the tennis matches. I'm a tennis lover.
Okay.
And they have the tennis open here. It's absolutely amazing.
It is.
And I told them that I'm not that much excited because my experience with the city is not that, particularly if you start to compare it with the other Gulf cities. And he said, no, there are very interesting things happening that through the last maybe 5 years. That was in 2008, 2009. So I was invited by the university and I gave a talk. And at that time, I also realized that for the very first time in the history of Arab countries, a country would dedicate 2.8 of its income for research. And to me, that was also another interesting sign. So it's not only about architecture and urban revolution, but it's also about a sort of a new agenda, a new sort of competition, not the typical competition of building the highest tower of the largest shopping mall, but also it's about brains. It's about how to sort of invest in people. So I was so excited to do the move.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm curious. Okay, so you came over to Qatar University, and so that included teaching as well as research.
Right.
So go a little bit more deeply into the kind of the research side. You know, what are you researching?
My fundamental sort of line of research is related to contemporary, what I call it, contemporary Gulf cities in the age of post-carbon paradigm.
Okay.
So, I mean, all what we are enjoying in UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia is related to the unprecedented revenues from oil and gas. Yeah. And everybody's enjoying wonderful, wonderful lifestyle. But then the question is how you can guarantee that all of these countries would have an excellent future and the people there will have an excellent sense of belonging if you don't have oil anymore, if you don't have gas anymore. And when I say we don't have gas or oil, not necessarily the depletion of oil and gas, but also because of the development of technology, oil and gas might be irrelevant. Yeah, I mean, you can rent an electrical car all over the place. Almost a couple of years ago, the very first solar-powered plane started its journey from Abu Dhabi to Muscat, and then they traveled the world. And this is in itself a manifestation of that we are approaching an era where oil and gas are not going to be relevant. So my line of research is not tackling this from an energy point of view, but from the city and architecture point of view. What kind of buildings we should build and what kind of cities we should plan.
Wow. Yeah, because you see it, you know, coming from Europe, coming from the UK, you see things changing with regards to the way people use the town centre now, that they're becoming ghost towns because the way it used to be that everyone used to go to the city centre to buy various goods, products, etc. But now people don't have to because they're buying everything online.
Sure.
And, you know, no one needs to go into the city centre. So the whole thinking about what a city centre is used for is changing.
Right.
So it must be exciting times that we're on that brink of, you know, the way we see cities is completely changing for, you know, we don't need to go into a city unless it's, you know, maybe for work. But why are we in a city for work, and why should we go there? Why don't we just, you know, be in small towns?
This is absolutely right. And speaking of UK, Richard Rogers, who is one of the most influential architects and urban designers, he wrote in 99 or maybe 98, he wrote a wonderful book called Cities for a Small Planet. And in this book, he was suggesting that we need to move from the age of mega cities and big cities to a more sort of little villages rather than, and as you rightly stated, those villages would create bond between people and places, and also between people and each other. Those are the places where you will have sense of community. Those are the places where, and he even extended his argument that you don't even need to go to the city for work. If we can create those kind of small, human-friendly urban centers where you can work, you can enjoy your time, you can shop, and all of this within maybe walking proximity, then this is the ideal situation.
Absolutely.
But the challenge is how to do this in Qatar, for instance, where we are in love with our Land Cruisers, right? So the challenge is not only to be excited about ideas from the West, but how to start gradually inject those ideas. And this is what we're trying to do. And this is what I promote in my research.
Well, so how long have you been doing this research, and has any of that research been implemented?
I think for the first question, almost I would go for 13 years.
Wow.
When I started to realize that we are approaching the knowledge economy paradigm. I read a couple of books in 2005 or 2006, and I was so excited that knowledge can be related to economy. I was under the impression that the economy is related either to resources, gas and oil, or related to industry, Porsche and BMW and whatever. But then to use the power of brains, to use the creativity of people, and to bring money out of this. And then later I read Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat. And I was so excited about some of his examples when he talked about Bangalore in India, which is the Silicon Valley of India, and also Silicon Valley in California. And those guys, they don't produce a tangible product.
No, that's
but
right.
Yet it's extremely lucrative industry. So I started to look at how cities and places can be prepared for this kind of knowledge of paradigm shift. And when it comes to applicability, when I was in Bahrain and also Qatar University, and now more effectively in my position at the Ministry of Municipality and Environment, I have different venues by which all of these ideas can be adopted and implemented. So if we look at the case of Qatar, for instance, the whole notion of knowledge-based urban development is becoming the backbone of the future development.
And when was that kind of implemented, or was that when you joined the ministry, or were they already in the process of, thinking?
To be honest with you, we need to give a credit for His Highness Sheikh Hamad, the father Emir, because he, in his vision, Qatar Vision 2030, he articulated the whole notion. Not only articulated, he was also acknowledging the paradigm shift from resources and industrial economy to knowledge economy. And he stated that it's written in the vision that we have to be prepared for the post-carbon paradigm, and we have to be prepared for creating a knowledge-based kind of society. But then from this vision, how you translate this into different kind of sectors: education, health, social affairs, and also architecture and planning and city development. So that was there, and there were a wonderful team working on that. But I think because of my research background, and also because of my ability to form small technical groups that can sort of elaborate on those ideas, we have a lot of interesting outcomes happening.
So what are you working on at the moment within the ministry?
We have three main projects that I am conducting. You can call it applicable research kind of projects. So number one, we are creating an overall strategy for the development of waterfronts in Qatar.
Waterfronts?
Yep, because waterfronts, we were particularly in the Gulf, and also Qatar is not exception. Our perception of the waterfront is that it's a beach, or It's a place where the nice hotels and exclusive people would have their villas or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, what we are trying to say in this particular research is that Qatar has almost more than 600 kilometers of water because it's a peninsula. So it's not only about Doha's Corniche, but it's about having a strategic kind of blueprint for those more than 600 kilometers, by which it's not only about beautification, it's not about having shaded areas, but it's more about how to use the waterfront as a catalyst for development.
Very good.
Another project that we are also excited about is the notion of, because of the locality and the traditions and the whole notion of the Qatari community. So in the Ministry of Urban Planning, we have specific areas designated for Qatari families. And I started this project by posing a very interesting question. What is unique about the Qatari family? Because if we only designate pieces of land, we're not really responding to cultural issues and social issues and so on and so forth. So this project is about how to transform those areas that were designated for Qatari families into places where literally and deeply Qatari families would feel that, well, this is part of us. This is representing our life. This is representing our values. This is representing our traditions and also even religion dimensions and so on and so forth. But at the same time, this is an interesting aspect also that I'm adding to the project. You want to do this, and also you want to avoid creating sense of gated communities. So how to have specific spots within the fabric of the city that would speak to the Qatari families within creating ghettos or gated communities similar to the gated communities that we live in. I am in favor of breaking the walls. Speaking of Pink Floyd.
Are you a Pink Floyd fan?
Absolutely, 100%. You cannot find an architect that not worshipping Pink Floyd, literally. I think it's a course.
Wow. No, that sounds fascinating. To, kind of think, how can you create that environment that is attractive to the local population, but not, as you say, put a wall around them. And
absolutely, yeah.
And you said there was 3 kind of projects that you're working on. What was the third?
And the third project is about streets.
Okay.
Because this is also very interesting, and again, it would relate us to the whole notion of the land cruisers, because all the Gulf cities were planned as car-based cities.
Yes.
You just drive in it.
Yeah, but you say that. But look, I've been here for 13 years, and I've seen a city be built up without much car parking.
Right.
So how was that planned when we are so reliant on the car as the main transportation?
Sure. So I will talk about this lack of parking, but maybe before talking about lack of parking, I will talk about the solution that would lead us to the situation where we don't need parking.
No, I know where you're going. But
exactly.
Right.
So thank you for that. so the idea is, if we change our perception that roads are not highways, streets are not only for cars, and we want to create environments and street design that would allow people to enjoy being in a street. You add to this that we have a tremendous increase in development in the whole sense of public transportation. The metro is on the run, and it's not a linear metro. It's a network of 4 lines that would cover the whole of metropolitan Doha. So if we are in a situation where the public transportation is in an excellent manner, and it's not related to any social degradation, because this is very important, the psychological dimension of using public transportation in the Gulf. People, and I did a lot of studies and I did a lot of interviews regarding that, local people in the Gulf would use the tube in London but they were under the impression that we cannot use public transportation in our own backyard.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. And this kind of rejection in the beginning was related to what kind of public transportation you're talking about. But then when they start to see what Q-Rail is doing, and I think they're doing a magnificent work in terms of the stations, the trains, and so on and so forth, they would realize that, well, it seems like almost a business class kind of compartment, right? Yeah. And the other important dimension is also how to use architecture and urban design and planning to transform streets into places for people. Shaded places, vibrant places, places where the sidewalk is as wide, 2-3 times as wide as the lanes of the cars. So I think with doing all of this, you will think 2 and 3 times before deciding to take your car to every single activity you're doing in Qatar. And this is our problem now, that if you want to go and meet your friends, you use your car. If you want to go to your job, you use your car. If you want to go in to buy a bottle of milk, you will also use your car. So this is what we are trying to do. But before telling people, please abandon your car and walk, you need to prepare the city for that, and you need to provide excellent public transportation.
So is that what you're saying? The lack of car parking is kind of forcing people to look at alternative solutions for, using the public transport? Was that kind of the...
Not only because of parking. I'm saying that we will enter a new sort of phase in the city of Doha and other countries.
Oh, absolutely. No, I think it will be taken up quite successfully because of the lack of parking.
Sure.
I generally use Uber to go to meetings because I know that there's no parking available. So it's easier just to order an Uber. So moving forward, as we're moving closer to the World Cup, there's a lot of development. A lot of the roads are being developed.
Right.
So there isn't one road I can't think of that hasn't got construction happening on it. So there's a huge amount of work happening at the moment. Is it mainly for... what is the big plan with this infrastructure? Is it basically, okay, we're moving to the World Cup, we've got to have a better infrastructure with our roads to cater for the amount of people that will be here, or is there a bigger plan after the World Cup?
I think this is a wonderful question, because I personally had first-hand experiences in South Africa, for instance. I was there invited to give a talk and also supervise some of the graduate students, and I met a lot of people in the streets, the restaurants, wherever, and I felt the deep frustration. I felt that it was all about broken promises and shattered dreams, literally, because everybody in the local community was under the impression that we will be approaching a new phase in our life because of our ability to host the event. And then after that, they ended up with a lot of white elephants, huge hotels that they cannot afford even to walk by it, and big stadiums that nobody's using it. And I think Qatar brilliantly learned from the experiences of South Africa and Brazil. And if you look at even the name of the committee handling everything regarding the FIFA, you will see the word legacy, which is, in my own opinion, a key word. Because legacy is suggesting post-event, right? What would happen after that? And particularly from our aspect, the architecture and urban planning and urban design and whatever, every single aspect is related to that. All what we are doing for hosting the FIFA is not for the 30 days of competitions, but it's for the future of the city and the future of this country. So even when we talk about stadiums, about roads, public transportations, hotels, communication activities and technologies, the idea of transit-oriented developments, the provision of parks and public spaces and green areas, focusing on how to revisit the heritage areas and historical places, the presence of signature museums like Museum of Islamic Art and the coming Qatar National Museum. All of this is geared towards creating an outstanding experience for the people that would come to watch the games, but it's also about maintaining the legacy of Qatar and Doha as a sort of future model of positive, sustainable, resilient, and smart urbanism and planning. So I'll give you, for instance, a very small example just to substantiate my argument. The FIFA requires a lot of training camps, not only stadiums,
yes.
Training camps.
Yep.
So for instance, our team at the Ministry of Urban Planning and Environment, they would allocate all of those training camps in a proximity of local communities or maybe schools. And therefore, after the competition, those places would be related to either community facility node or related to the school. And therefore, whatever is happening for the FIFA, this would be the legacy for the local community, right? Another interesting aspect is the whole notion of the stadium. Because again, the stadium went through different paradigm shifts, very similar to the museum. Because the stadium was only geared for a specific event, maybe for once a week or once a month, where you'll have a lot of spectators coming and so on and so forth. Some restaurants, coffee places, and that's it. Now, the new way of thinking about stadium is that you will look at it as a sort of a community hub kind of place, a place that you can generate for it almost a daily use, where people can be engaged to the place on a daily basis. And this is the new agenda, that every single stadium in Qatar is designed and sort of envisioned as such.
So it won't be just for football, it will be for a variety of different activities.
You name it. We had a brainstorming even about the idea of weddings.
Oh, really?
Because we do a lot of outdoor weddings in Qatar.
Great
and the
idea.
stadium is an outdoor place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And markets, celebrations, activities, concerts, and so on and so forth. So the whole idea is that you gradually show the local community that a stadium is not only for football, a stadium is not an abandoned place, a stadium is not the kind of place that you would use once every 15 days. It's your backyard. And this is the kind of, again, the paradigm shift that I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but it's interesting what you were saying about the training pitches, because I remember when I was first here, I was organising company football league and tennis league, but for the football league it was nearly impossible to find a pitch to use or to book. But with this happening, it will be easier, and it's becoming easier.
Right.
The more we're leading up to the World Cup, it's easier because there are a lot more pitches that have been built.
Sure.
So no, that's great.
Yeah.
So we've gone past the World Cup. Do you see, with architecture and urbanization in the future, how is Qatar? Are there going to be more towns? Are we going to still have the main towns here, or is there plans to build in the rest of the country?
I see some sort of very clear features for the future. Number one is what I called it in my latest book, the knowledge-based urban development, which is that we totally I don't want to say forget, but we totally realized that the whole notion of imitating cities like New York or Singapore or whatever is not adding anything to the any Gulf city.
Yeah.
You have, I would argue that every city on earth has its own story, and we should dwell on that. And I think Qatar was able in the last 10 years to sort of not only relate to its history, but also to create its own new identity as a place for research, knowledge, libraries, museums, and so on and so forth. This kind of architecture and urbanization, you can quickly and swiftly move it to different spots around the country. I mean, look at the notion of constructing a museum or a library or a research center, and then you can use it as a catalyst for urban development. So this is one feature that I'm sure is part of the overall portrait of Qatar in the future, that we're not excited anymore about towers, but we are more excited about this knowledge-based kind of development. Another interesting thing is related also to the multi-center kind of urbanism. I mean, Doha captured the spotlight for a good number of years, but our ideas now, and we have excellent teams focusing on that, is that to look at every single other city in Doha, and again, as I said, we would create a strategy for it. And this strategy is related to its past, its history, and also related to what kind of role this specific city can play. And therefore, I'm so much excited about this notion of multi-centers urbanism as opposed to more centralized. I see also, as I said, aggressive move towards, I mean, in the pipelines, in the blueprints, aggressive move towards transit-oriented development and how to help both Qataris and expats to acknowledge the idea. And then my very final point regarding this is that I see also a very balanced approach to the whole notion of who is the target group of all of this. It's not only about Qataris. It's about Qataris and about expats, in a sense that with all these new immigration laws and the whole notion of long residency and so on and so forth, I think Qatar also was able and will be able to establish an interesting sense of belonging between people and places. One of my fundamental challenges that I shared in most of my research was related to people, they don't feel that they belong to the place. And this is very bad. And this is what's happening in UAE, in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. Everybody's on contractual basis. I will leave after a year. I will leave after 2 years.
Right.
Why you want to ask me about my opinion about the city? It's not my city, right? So you cannot deal with 85% of the population as such. And I think this is what Qatar is brilliantly doing now. Those 85% of expats, of the populations are expats, but they have to have a say. We have to acknowledge their presence. And whoever from those 85% is excited about using Qatar as his final destination, we would be happy for that. And therefore, people like us working in the architecture and urban design and planning domains, they should consider how all of these places are also talking to the 85%, not only the 15%. So I think this is also a fundamental change in the sense of how the future Gulf city would speak to people rather than only locals.
Nice. Fascinating. And do you see the like compounds disappearing as well? Because it was very much, you know, for expats to go and live on a compound. Do you see them disappearing and it being much more open, or do you see there is a place for a compound?
Right. Well, you know what? It's interesting to trace. I love, as an academic person and research-based kind of mentality, I like to trace issues. The whole notion of gated community, when it was emerged in the States, was related to the whole notion of safety.
Yeah, true.
Or in Saudi Arabia, for instance, was related to the huge difference between the in and out, right? So if you have an American expats coming to work in Aramco, they cannot tolerate what would happen in the outside the compound, and therefore they want to create their own world within. Exactly. Yeah. Now, if you take this argument and try to apply it in Qatar, you're talking about one of the safest countries on earth.
Absolutely.
And you're talking about a country where whatever you're doing, as long as it's within the respectable way of life, it's acceptable. You can jog, you can ride your bike, you can do a barbecue. So what is the value of the wall here?
Yeah, exactly.
And this is exactly my question, that in the beginning we were only imitating. We were only under the impression that expats, they love compounds.
Yeah.
But you can have the compound without a wall, because it's extremely safe and it's extremely open. And on the contrary, you can deliver a message to your kids and to your wife and to your neighbors that we don't need a wall, the wall, because we are in a very safe place.
Yeah.
And I think breaking all these walls would also bridge the gap between the locals and the expats, and would create a sort of a dialogue. And maybe we will end up with a situation where we will have Qataris and expats living together and respect their way of life and their values.
And that kind of opens my mind in regards to, do you see in the future that there will be majlises for expats and locals to kind of meet and discuss?
Well, even now, I think the Majlis is a beautiful, beautiful. I think Majlis, if you take it to a more philosophical level, I would say it's a representation of a different level of democracy. Yeah. And sometimes we skip that because in the Majlis, people talk, exchange ideas, express their opinions, and end up with decisions, which is a very democratic process, in my own opinion. So I always use this example as we need also to sort of localize the concept of democracy, right? But then even now, any Majlis, and I've done this plenty of times, is open for expats. You can just open the door and walk and talk to the families and talk to about issues, and they are so hospitable. You will end up with a wonderful dinner. So yeah, absolutely. So even now, the Majlis is open for expats. Yeah. But as you rightly said, if we also change our perception, locals and expats, and we realized that this is our city, this is our country. I decided to come here and stay. My kids are happy. My wife is enjoying her time. So let's mingle together. Absolutely. Let's talk. Let's live together. Yeah. I feel sometimes, to be very honest with you, I feel sometimes sorry when I meet people that are working in the Gulf for the last 10, 15, 20, 25 years, and they're still having the mindset of an outsider. Yeah. This is very painful.
No, absolutely. I've got one more question. What is the obsession with people and having tall towers? Why do we, when we think of a city, that we have to build, all these towers?
Well, my answer would be sort of very, very interesting, because with all what I've said, I am not rejecting towers if you would go for a specific vertical development with a lot of symbolic kind of aspect connected to it. So if you want to have the Petronas Towers in Malaysia, for instance, if you want to go for a representation of a company or a headquarters for the United Nations or whatever, this is absolutely acceptable, because the vertical development is also a statement about technology, about economical powers, and so on and so forth. I think I am rejecting the fact that we fall into the trap of if we want to deliver a message that Arab cities, Middle Eastern cities, Gulf cities are progressing, then we have to have a lot of skyscrapers in our the fabric of our cities.
Yeah.
No, you don't need to.
No, I know.
You don't need to. Maybe you will deliver a message that you are more progressive by having more museums, more universities, more places for people, more parks, more open waterfronts. So I think this is happening now, to be honest with you. But the temptation in the beginning of the 20th century, the 21st century, the temptation of copying an image of a city locally was all over the place.
Absolutely.
But we sort of went through that and we're done with it.
Yeah, that's how I feel sometimes when you visit other cities. You could be anywhere in the world because they were imitating each other, and it's just like, well, come on, there's got to be a difference. You've got to show who you are, really
Definitely.
are. Don't imitate other cities.
Sure.
Well, this has been fascinating. Thank you, Ali. I really
you.
appreciate you coming on the show and giving us an insight into architecture and urbanization. And I would love to have you on the show in the future if there's, talk about this more, if there's any more developments or if there's anything that you want to share with us. I'd love to have you on the show.
It was my honor. I enjoyed every minute and I would love to come back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Is there any way that people can get hold of you? Is there an email address that people can write to you if they, if they want more information?
Ali Alraouf, ALIALRAOUF @gmail.com or yahoo.com.
Super. Well, we'll put that in the show notes.
Definitely.
So people can get in contact with you if they want you to come and do a talk or, well, whatever else you do.
Sure.
So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for watching Your Onion, and we wish you all the best. And if you're watching, please subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or any other podcast app. You just need to type in Your Onion. Have a good week. All the best.